Socialism has spread all over the world in the last 200 years. In every country, the lessons and scars of its own history are still visible. On the other hand, each country's socialism is shaped by the global history, rich tradition, and different interpretations of a movement that has been the world's main critical response to capitalism as a system. Socialism has changed our past and will change our future, so we need to understand it. However, before we start our video, we would appreciate it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel and also press the bell icon. Let's get started. 1. Socialism is a yearning for something better than capitalism. Socialism is when workers realize that their problems and limitations aren't caused by their bosses but by the capitalist system as a whole. This system gives both sides incentives and choices, as well as rewards and punishments for their choices of behavior. It makes them fight over and over again, and the employees realize that the only way out is to change the system. Marx defined exploitation as a situation in which workers make their employers more money than their wages are worth. In capitalist societies, everything is shaped by the way people exploit each other. Socialists want a better society, so they are calling for an end to exploitation and a system in which workers are their own bosses. Socialists want to be able to explore and develop their full potentials as individuals and members of society while also contributing to its growth and well-being. Socialism is a very different way of running an economy than capitalism, feudalism, or slavery. Each of the last three split society into a minority class that ruled and a majority class that was ruled over. When most people realized that slavery and feudal systems were wrong, they fell. In the past, people who had a lot of power worked hard to make things better. Slaves and serfs were replaced by employees, and masters and lords were replaced by employers. Since the beginning of time, people have always wanted and fought for something better. That something better is socialism, a system that doesn't divide people but instead makes work a democratic process where everyone has an equal say and everyone is their own boss. 2. Socialism is not a single, unified theory. People spread socialism all over the world, but depending on the situation, they did so in many different ways. Socialists thought that capitalism led to more and more inequality, repeated cycles of unemployment and depression, and made it harder for people to build democratic governments and cultures that include everyone. Socialists came up with and talked about solutions that ranged from the government regulating capitalist economies to the government owning and running businesses to changing both private and government businesses from hierarchical top-down systems to democratic cooperatives. Socialists sometimes fell apart because of these arguments. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, socialists who supported the new Soviet Union used the name communist to emphasize their commitment to socialism, which means that the government owns and runs businesses. People who didn't like Soviet-style socialism tended to like it when the government regulated private capitalists. They kept the word socialist and often called themselves social democrats or democratic socialists. Over the past 100 years, the two groups have argued about the pros and cons of the two different ideas of socialism, as shown by examples of Soviet and Scandinavian socialism. At the start of the 21st century, an old form of socialism came back and grew. It focuses on changing the way businesses work from top-down hierarchies, where a capitalist or a state board of directors makes all the important business decisions, to worker cooperatives, where all employees have equal, democratic rights to make these decisions, making the group of employees their own employer. 3. The Soviet Union and China achieved state capitalism, not socialism. Lenin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union, once said that socialism was a goal that had not yet been reached. Instead, the Soviets had made what is called state capitalism. A socialist party ran the government, and the government had become an industrial capitalist, taking the place of the private capitalists who used to run the country. The Soviet Revolution changed who was the boss, but it didn't get rid of the boss-employee relationship. So, in a certain way, it was capitalist. Stalin, who took over for Lenin, said that the Soviet Union had reached socialism. In a way, he presented Soviet state capitalism as a model for socialism everywhere. Since then, people who don't like socialism have used this label to say that socialism is the same as political dictatorship. This, of course, meant hiding or denying the facts that dictatorships have often existed in capitalist societies and socialism has often existed without dictatorships. After copying the Soviet model at first, China changed its development plan to a mix of state and private capitalism overseen by the government and focused on exports. China's powerful government would organize a basic deal with global capitalists, providing cheap labor, government support, and a growing domestic market. In exchange, foreign capitalists would work with Chinese state or private capitalists, share technology, and add Chinese goods to global wholesale and retail trade systems. China's type of socialism, which was a mix of communist and social democratic ideas, showed that it could grow faster over a longer period of time than any capitalist economy ever had. For the US, Soviet Union, and China have more in common than you think. As feudalism gave way to capitalism in Europe in the 1800s, it pushed for freedom, equality, brotherhood, and democracy. When these promises didn't come true, many people turned against capitalism and turned to socialism. In the 20th century, attempts to build post-capitalist and socialist systems were eventually met with similar criticisms. Critics said that both of these systems had more in common with capitalism than their supporters knew. Self-critical socialists came up with a different story based on the fact that both systems had failed. Some socialists say that the US and the Soviet Union were private capitalism and state capitalism, respectively. On both sides, their Cold War rivalry was seen as part of the century's big fight between capitalism and socialism. So, what fell apart in 1989 was not socialism but the capitalism of the Soviet state. Also, another type of state capitalism in China grew rapidly after 1989. 5. Thank American socialists, communists, and unionists for the 1930s New Deal. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, FDR's government brought in more money so that Washington could pay for huge, expensive increases in public services. Some of these were Social Security, the first federal system for helping people who lost their jobs and couldn't find work, the first federal minimum wage, and a large-scale federal jobs program. More than ever before, corporations and the wealthy were taxed by FDR. FDR was re-elected 3 times after this radical program. A group of communists, socialists, and labor unionists came up with and pushed his radical ideas from the bottom up. Before he was elected, he wasn't a very hardline Democrat. 6. If 5 was news to you, that's due to the massive US-led global purge of socialists and communists after World War II. After the economic crash of 1929, capitalism had a bad name. The growing political power of the US left made it possible for the government to step in and take money from corporations and the rich and give it to regular people. In response, private capitalists and the Republican Party promised to get rid of the New Deal. After the end of World War II and FDR's death in 1945, the New Deal coalition could be broken up. The plan was to make the coalition's parts look bad, especially the communists and socialists. Anti-communism became the main strategic weapon very quickly. Overnight, the Soviet Union went from being a wartime ally to an enemy whose agents wanted to control the world. That threat had to be stopped, pushed back, and gotten rid of. Anti-communism was the main focus of US domestic policy, which reached hysterical levels and led to the public campaigns of US Senator Joseph McCarthy. In a wave of anti-communism, Communist Party leaders were arrested, jailed, and sent away. This quickly spread to socialist parties and socialism as a whole. Actors, directors, screenwriters, musicians, and others were put on a blacklist and were not allowed to work in Hollywood. McCarthy's witch hunt ruined the careers of thousands of people and made sure that the media, politicians, and academics would not like socialism, at least in public. During the height of the Cold War, U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy led a campaign to put high-ranking government officials and other people on trial for subversive activities and membership in the Communist Party. In other countries, when peasants or workers rose up against business or political oligarchs, the oligarchs often asked the US for help by calling their opponents socialists or communists. The global project to fight communism sometimes took the form of a change in government. In 1965 and 1966, between 500,000 and 3 million Indonesian communists were killed in large numbers. 7. Since socialism was capitalism's critical shadow, it spread to those subjected by and opposed to capitalist colonialism. In the first half of the 20th century, local movements against European colonialism in Asia and Africa and informal colonialism by the United States in Latin America helped spread socialism. Colonized people who wanted independence were inspired by workers in the colonizing countries who were fighting against being exploited. They also saw the possibility of working together with these workers. From their side, these last workers could see similar possibilities. This helped start a socialist tradition around the world. The different ideas about socialism that had grown up in the centers of capitalism led to even more ideas that were even more different. Different parts of the anti-colonial and anti-imperialist movement interacted with socialism and made it stronger. So, that's it for today. We hope you enjoyed the video. Use the comment section below to tell us what you think about the video. Also, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click the bell button to be notified of all the latest videos.